Hi, I'm Michael, and welcome to Beyond the Screenplay, the podcast where each week we do a conversational deep dive analysis into a film. Today we are talking about Amélie, the 2001 film written by Guillaume Laurent and directed by Jean-Pierre Jeunet. I'm joined by the Beyond the Screenplay team, Trisha Arand.
Hello, everyone.
Brian Bittner.
Hello, hello.
And Alex Calleros.
Hi.
Okay, so before we dive in, we have a couple announcements to make. So, as we had mentioned before, for our 900 patron goal, once we pass that, we'll be doing a public episode on our favorite movies of the 90s. So, our favorite movies, top 10 from 1990 to 1998. And then a patron exclusive episode on our top 5 favorite films from the year 1999, which, as we all know, is a seminal year for film. There's lots of things to talk about. So that will be happening as our 900 goal.
Where does The Phantom Menace fall on everyone's list? Find out.
Wow.
I forgot. It's 99.
Number 1, obviously, it's episode 1. And then, so the results of our poll for which trilogy series we're going to do for the 1,000 patron goal are in, and it was kind of surprising and interesting how it played out. So on some of the platforms, Back to the Future was clearly in the lead, but overall, the most votes actually went to The Godfather. So for 1,000, we will be talking about the Godfather trilogy, which I'm really excited about. I haven't seen those in a long time. I feel like I haven't really talked about them either, so I'm really excited to just talk about The Godfather with you.
Yeah,
that's gonna be a whole
It's a thing.
There's going to be so much Brando from over here. You guys are going to be
there it is.
Yes.
And young Pacino impressions, pre this guy, he was not the personal, strictly personal. So it was just this very, it's
totally
building.
Different. Yeah. The midpoint of all midpoints, perhaps also. There's so many things
absolutely
that we're going to get into. So that's really exciting. And obviously, because people were very excited about Back to the Future, we will be doing that in a future goal also, because we've got to talk about that also. So that's all of that. But for now, Amélie. So Trisha,
yay!
Amélie was in your top 10 favorite films of the 2000s.
Yes.
Number 3.
Yeah.
Tell me about Amélie and your relationship with it.
I really, really love this movie. I got to say a little bit about it during the top 10 episode, and I feel like I didn't do a very good job articulating what makes it so endearing to me. I love that this is, I don't know, I just feel like it's one of these unique love stories that, at its heart is a love story, but really is just a really beautiful sort of character study. And it has a really precise vision of the world of the story. And the theme is really present in every single aspect of it as well. And so, on its surface, you might just say a lonely girl learns to connect with some of the people around her and falls in love in the process. But it just feels like it takes in so much of life and the experience of being human that it somehow has this greater poetry to it, or somehow feels more profound than that sort of tiny explanation that I just gave, or log line that I sort of just gave. And I just think it's so beautiful. It's beautiful to look at. Every frame of it is really beautiful. I mean, it's very stylized, and we can talk about that. Mm-hmm. But it has this incredible score by Jan Tiersen that I used to listen to all the time. Mm-hmm. And that also does a lot of work in the movie, for the record. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a beautiful movie that is so hopeful and full of life and so playful. And it's just great. It's just a great little film. I really, really love it.
Yeah, I was definitely struck by how, like you're saying, it's about her, but it's also about all these people. And it's kind of doing that thing where you meet a bunch of people, and as the story progresses, you're kind of following their stories and her, it's kind of through her and people's interactions with her, or reflections from her, that they kind of change, or we see life through their eyes also, which I think adds to the kind of the wide texture and of life that you're talking about, where you get to see a little bit of everybody's lives and those glimpses through her, while also following this simple story.
Exactly.
Awesome. And Alex, what about you? I feel like I don't think we've ever talked about Amélie
That's
But
interesting.
maybe for the
yeah.
first time, we've never talked about a movie
Wow.
before at the podcast.
Wow,
so tell me.
yeah.
I was
Tell
going
me-
to say, you guys
Yeah.
seem to like you have a history on every single movie, and somehow this is the fresh movie that you've never
Right.
spoken about or has ever come up. I love it.
Which is interesting because, and maybe I just kind of lost this movie for a while in my life, but revisiting it for this podcast, it was like, oh yeah, wait a minute. I watched this movie a lot in high school. Like this was a big influence on me. And I really, like, as far as just a movie that is so directed, you know, like as an aspiring director, it's like, ooh, I can see the filmmaking and it's so cool. And I love how it looks and I love the music and the way it's cut and the visual effects. There's so much going on that is like above and beyond what you would expect from like, you know, that simple log line. Like you said, Trisha, it seems like a very simple, small movie, but it feels so big and it has such a scope to it, even though it really is just about normal people in Paris. And so, yeah, I really love this movie and I'm so glad to have revisited it and kind of remember that love that I've had for it. And I think about, there were a few movies during this era, like, you know, I think I saw also, you know, Before Sunset in high school, you know, near the end of high school. And then I think a few years later, Vicky Cristina Barcelona came out. And there's like this series of movies that cemented my incredibly romantic vision of Europe and like European cities. Like these movies like are totally wrapped up in my feelings about places like Paris or Barcelona. And this movie, like, I mean, yeah, I just wanted to like live in this world. I wanted to go move to Paris and be in a charming like street corner and, you know, be in the world of Amelie because it's just so magical. Something really interesting. I was reading some trivia on IMDb, and the director and the crew would actually clean anytime they were shooting on location in Paris. They would clean the area of all debris, grime, graffiti.
Wow.
So like it really is an imaginary version of Paris that is like this pristine fantasy world in Amelie's mind, which is interesting. It's, you know, there's the reality of maybe like a real city, you know, that has its own problems, and then the world that this movie creates, which is kind of this fantasy world. But I love going there.
You can't have Royale with cheese wrappers like on the street in this movie. It wouldn't look right.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting to hear because, you know, this is one of those movies where the location is a character, right? Like the world is a part of her, is an extension of her and how she sees things and all that stuff. So it's a movie where you couldn't extract it from this place and put it anywhere else. And it's always fun to see movies that are really well realized and embrace that and execute it so nicely.
Yeah.
Brian, what about you? Did you see it when it came out? Did you see it later?
I definitely saw it around the time it came out. I don't remember exactly whether it was, 6 months later or 2 years later, whatever. But kind of like I mentioned when we talked about Black Swan recently, it was a movie that I watched and loved and went out and bought and then watched again for the second time recently. Like just never watched it again, But yeah, like I really like this movie. Actually, when I worked at Hollywood Video in Philadelphia, they had the foreign film section. So I would just like rent some of those and bring them home. So I also rented Happenstance and He Loves Me, He Loves Me Not, which were two other Audrey Tautou movie, like sort of French rom-coms from 1 year on either side of Amelie. And yeah, like this movie a lot, but just hadn't watched it again. So it was really nice to revisit it. And it definitely has that sort of, it's stylized, but it's, as you guys were kind of saying, like that is part of the theme. It's part of it's kind of like we talked about with Moonlight. Like we are seeing this world through the character's eyes, So when something happens, it's happening because that's how this sort of storyteller that is telling us the story is seeing it happen, which is why you can't have litter in the street and stuff like that, because that's not how this character sees the world. Maybe certain moments in the movie, but not overall. And yeah, lots to talk about, but just overall, thumbs up.
Yeah.
This movie really reminds me that there was sort of an era of like, I don't know, sort of like a heyday of whimsical like whimsical movies that kind of happened, and Eternal Sunshine was right around this, and they made like Science of Sleep and some of these others that are just like the whimsy. It's so whimsical and everything's like made of cardboard, or like everyone has like a really quaint motorbike that they're riding on or something. Like it was just, I think it was back in college, I put together like a list of like the indie romance and the whimsical romance. And there were so many of these. Like, I don't know. I wonder how it affected us potentially as millennials. Like, Alex, you're talking about, you know, this is how you see Europe, right? Because of different movies, like romantic movies that came out at the time. It's like maybe how we see love is so influenced by like the quirkiness and the like whimsy of it.
Like Garden State, I mean, is so part of this whimsy moments. Yeah.
Big time. Yeah. And so like the Manic Pixie Dream Girl, right? I wouldn't say that the whole thing about that as a trope is that that's framing through which a male character sees a female character. And obviously that's not the case in Amelie. However, there's a lot of like sort of the quirkiness about her where she's kind of messy and kind of unpredictable in some ways and bold and like there's some of that here, I think, also in the DNA of this movie and how much of it came from this movie and how much of it was just sort of in the zeitgeist of like, maybe this is what we want from our romantic films right now. Who can say? But definitely an interesting, to me, like maybe the quintessential and maybe the best example of this kind of movie in terms of like rewatchability. It doesn't feel like it's aged in the way that some of those other movies feel like they have.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd be really curious to sort of track the life of that late 90s, early aughts style thing. Because you've got like Oliver Stone doing it really heavily in like the 90s. And then you've got like Three Kings. And then into Amelie, Eternal Sunshine, you know, there was going on all over the place. And then like there were some Tony Scott movies that didn't go over too well because they were so stylized, like Domino and like Man on Fire was a good example. But even that was just like every shot is like, look at this, what's happening.
You're just talking about like aggressive style things in general.
He's not,
not whimsy.
No, style. Sorry, the just movies that are like sort of doing this almost music video type thing, you know?
Right.
And that was the era where I fell in love with film, basically. So maybe that's why when I see a Moonlight or a Parasite or something like that, I'm like, ooh, okay, this movie is like doing style things, but it's doing it for a reason. And it's making me feel more than if you just told me this story. But like you said, some of those you watch them now and you're like, good God, how did they like, this doesn't even look like a movie anymore. And Amelie still feels absolutely like, you know, it doesn't feel dated when you watch it.
I think the big problem is that a lot of those movies tried to incorporate the whimsy into something that's otherwise kind of grounded. Eternal Sunshine is another example where it's like, does a really good balance. And we talked about this in the episode, balancing some stuff that feels grounded and real while being totally, you know, bonkers by having this construction of like, it's all a dream. And Amelie, has a careful sort of framework of like a narrator is going to tell you a thing and the whole world is through this character's eyes and her imagination. But some of those other movies, I feel like Garden State is an example where it's like, here's a really quirky, big, whimsical thing potentially that's trying to act like it's also real life. And some of that I feel like doesn't work as well.
Like a family living in like a boat in a dumpster trash place or something. Yeah.
For example.
It's probably like the bumpiest part of that movie. I will say that I feel like for whatever reason, without darkness, I can't really get on board with lightness. I think that's kind of like a weird Michael quirk. And so when it's just whimsy, it like is kind of off-putting to me. And so I feel like that's maybe why I gravitate toward the more like the balance and why, like you're saying, Eternal Sunshine does this great balance of both, where it's like it hits the bittersweet and I need the bitter in order to like accept the sweet because I'm dramatic and complicated. I don't know.
Okay. All right.
As a kid, I was fascinated by computers. I remember coming home from school at age 5 and proclaiming to my parents that we needed to get a personal computer and jump onto the information superhighway. Computers were like magic, and I wanted to learn all about how they worked. But at that time, when I went to learn about how computers worked, all I could find were dense books about transistors and ones and zeros and all kinds of things that really didn't help me actually understand what a computer is doing. If only I had Brilliant. Brilliant is an online learning platform for STEM, and it takes a hands-on approach so you learn by doing. I recently jumped into their Computer Science Fundamentals course, which is all about learning the key ideas of computer science in a fun and simple way. Each page of the course has some kind of visual element, some text, a couple paragraphs at most, and a multiple choice question which prompts you to think about and internalize the bit you just learned. But Brilliant goes even further. In the second part of the course, all about writing computer programs, each page is interactive. Your goal on each page is to give instructions to a cartoon drone to help it navigate through a simple grid and deliver a package at its destination. But you're not writing complex code, you're just dragging and dropping simple instructions for it to follow. Up, down, right, etc. The whole course is a fun and effective way to quickly understand the fundamentals of how computers work. So much more helpful than a dense book about binary and microtransistors. Brilliant is full of these kinds of fascinating and challenging courses on a variety of intriguing topics. If you want to learn more about Brilliant and help support our show, head to brilliant.org/beyond the screenplay and sign up for free. Or simply click the link in the show notes. The first 200 people that go to that link will get 20% off the annual premium subscription. Thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring this episode.
Well, then that could bring us into talking about Amelie itself, because something that I'm very curious to hear from you guys about is sort of like how are you following or rooting for Amelie and Nino as this movie goes on? Because I feel like into the second act, the movie does get dark, but in a way that's really quiet. When she starts like meddling with Joseph,
the grocer,
and no, Joseph and Georgette.
Okay.
Like the meddling with like
yeah.
crappy people is fun, right? Because
Yeah.
you're just like, cool, go screw them up, you know. Well, except then the grocer almost like has a heart attack. I'm like, well, it's, you know, but it's
Right.
like when she
Still a
makes a
person.
couple out of nothing who, as far as we know, have no interest in each other until they find out the other one is potentially interested, and then we sort of follow that relationship as it never really is great. It's always sort of like questionable and stuff. And then, you know, as Amelie sort of is doing all these things for other people and almost getting like addicted to this thing without really dealing with her own stuff. And then Nino is like really creepy when he's the ghost on the ride, you know what I mean? So it's like,
that's a weird section.
It's really weird. Yeah. So it's interesting because I feel like it is doing darkness, but just in a very subtle kind of way. You know, it's not like Amelie is, you know, strung out on heroin in the corner or anything like that, right? It's like that's not what this movie is. But I was fascinated rewatching it and just sort of tracking how it is sort of always being a little challenging, and you're always sort of going like, do I want the character to be doing this right now, or is the character happy that they're doing this right now? That kind of stuff. So anyway, curious about your guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, I feel like those moments that you're pointing out are the like kind of my favorite moments in some ways, or my favorite aspects of it, of like that couple, like you're saying, that is kind of made out of nothing. They have this kind of passionate, amazing, you know, time.
Jurassic Park sex.
Right. The T-Rex. Oh, no, I'm not going to finish that sentence.
Tyrannosaurus sex, you can say it.
No. The ripples happen when the T-Rex is coming.
Wow.
Well, this has been our episode on Amelie.
Wow, you guys just ruined my favorite movie.
Yep. It's done.
Both movies.
Oh, man.
Both movies.
Yeah.
That's true. I'm never going to watch either of those the same. But yes, then you see their relationship kind of deteriorate after, you know, that exciting first meeting. I feel like I like that because it starts to get at that bittersweet thing that I was saying that I like, where love and life is hard. And I think when movies make it too easy or like too all flowers and rose petals is when I kind of disengage a little bit, or I'm like, okay, well, that's a nice fantasy story. But I feel like I derive more meaning when there are characters that have loved and lost, like the bartender or the woman that owns that place has that like really tragic story about what happened to her, and the trapeze and breaking, you know, her leg, and now she limps. And, you know, I feel like all of that kind of adds weight to the world and kind of increases the stakes almost for Amelie, of like, you know, nothing is guaranteed. Like love isn't guaranteed in this world, no matter your perspective on it. And so you really do have to go for it and snatch it and try, because life can be unfair. So those elements, I was also tracking that a little bit, and I really appreciated what they added to the texture of the world.
Yeah, I actually found this movie to be pretty bittersweet throughout. I think I think there's this shiny golden hued exterior that is so
green.
charming.
It's more green
or
hued,
green,
really. Yeah.
Whatever, yeah.
But there's a lot of gold.
I
White
like
then becomes yellow.
You're
And it's a
bathing,
whole,
you're
like,
bathing
shift.
in color in this movie.
Definitely.
Yes.
It's I wrote a note. This whole movie is a sumptuous treat. That was my analytical note watching this movie.
Mine was, it's so green.
But I found, from the very beginning, when they're kind of doing her, already kind of whimsical childhood, where it's like, her heart beats so fast from being touched, but it's like, it meant that she was like homeschooled and a shut-in. Her mom died from somebody falling on her. And even just like the story of like the fish,
Yeah.
the moment when they put the fish into the river and like the fish is looking up at her and then the raindrops come and like blur it out. Like and there's this really kind of sweetness and darkness right from the beginning. And the music, the Jan Tiersen's music throughout is also writing that line of both just genuinely beautiful and like kind of like life affirming, but then also quite sad and quite, melancholy a lot of the time. So I that's part of why I love this movie, is because I think that bittersweet mood is like my mood that I love to get from like a movie like this. Like I don't want it to be a movie where I do kind of shut down because it's all sweet or all sad. Like this bittersweet mood is like hits my spot. So
it was really interesting watching this and realizing that it came out the same year as the Royal Tenenbaums, because that opening is a Wes Anderson movie, but
Right.
but it's not. It's like it's its own thing, but it has that kind of bittersweet, dark humor, like telling this kind of tragic story in a whimsical way that creates this interesting tone. And even like the framing of it, like a lot of it felt very Wes Anderson-y, and it was just interesting. And I did appreciate that section a lot.
Also, Big Fish was 2 years later, which also sort of fits into this this
whimsy.
decade of whimsy. Yeah.
Yeah. The decade
Narrated
of whimsy.
Whimsy.
Narrated whimsy.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that I agree with you, Alex. And I think that one of the ways that the movie achieves that tone that you're talking about is that death is a part of the world from the very beginning. And so, Amelie's mother dies in a horrifying way.
Yeah.
Which is also treated as a very comedic way.
It is.
Which is a nice way of setting the tone of like, this movie is going to live in both of these worlds.
Exactly
Yeah.
right. It's even down to the construction of the sentence that the narrator says. She's like, instead of a baby brother, God sends her this woman who is a tourist that decides she wants to end her life by jumping off the whatever. Just even those two phrases where it's like, it's a humorous juxtaposition within that sentence, right? Like, we wanted this, we got this other thing that was the worst possible thing you could have imagined, but in kind of a funny way, I guess. But then, yeah, down to the goldfish, where it's like the goldfish is suicidal. That's why he jumps out of the pool, right? Like, and even the, what I would consider to be the inciting incident of this movie is the death of Lady Diana. And that's the death piece that's right there. And that becomes sort of the backdrop of the whole plot, where, the grocer's assistant is obsessed with her, and people are sort of talking about that very public, very famous death as being crucial to sort of our understanding of this time period, where there was a death that was very public that a lot of people thought about, that shook a lot of people at the time, and really shakes people in this movie. And, Amelie, there's that whole section where then Amelie sees her own like funeral on the TV, where it's like, oh, this amazing caregiver of the world, like Mother Teresa figure, has perished at her young age,
but like never took time to herself, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Like there's like little hints of like what she's gonna be dealing with. Yeah.
All of that is that death is a part of the world, but at the same time, within the boundaries of the main story, nobody gets hurt. is the
Mhm.
other thing that I think is really
Mm.
critical. So there's this base layer of we understand that death is a part of life, but this movie is about life, and we're like focusing on the life part, and the death part just kind of makes the life part, throws the life part into relief, or makes the life part
Mm.
even sweeter. So we're not ignoring that the death part is there, but at the same time, the boundaries of the world are very safe for the characters. I'm never worried that something really bad is going to happen to Amelie in this movie, or any of the other like named characters that we start to spend time with. And so it's a really interesting, again, it makes the theme richer without losing that very precise tone, I think.
There's not many films that give you this feeling of just like life is happening everywhere, and it's not just from your one perspective, but like there's so much life happening you could not even contain it all. Like there's those whole sequences where the narrator is saying, at precisely this moment, there are two wine glasses dancing on a table, and at the same time, this man crossed out his friend's name from the address book.
Oh,
And that
yeah,
is-
another instance of death.
right, and that all that is part of the whimsy aesthetic. The narrator saying these like minutia things, but there's a more profound element to it as well, where it's like the movie both kind of begins and ends with these moments of zooming out and just being like, okay, yeah, Amelie's little world here with these particular characters was just one little slice of this vast world of life that's just constantly happening.
Well, thematically, to me, this is a story about the interconnectedness of life and of people to each other, and like having those zoom out like montages of this is what was happening at this precise moment here and here and here is echoing the theme, which is that Amelie is behaving in her life. That's sort of her whole problem as the movie opens. She's behaving in this isolated way because people have made her isolated, right? Her mother died, and her father is very cold to her and everything. And they have that wonderful moment where it's like she tried having boyfriends and they were not great.
Yeah.
But we see that she's basically living this lonely, disconnected life and finding this relic, right? Again, the inciting incident is finding that relic, that tin box of things, which actually gets resolved very early on.
Right.
That storyline, but it opens Amelie's mind about how she might be connected to other people. And it's as she starts pursuing those avenues of connection with all kinds of people in her life, with her father, with her coworkers at the restaurant where she works, and even, strangers or people she sees every day but doesn't know very well, like the grocer and the grocer's assistant, and her neighbor that, is also a shut-in in his flat, which is, I want to talk about him because he's great as a supporting character. But it's as she starts pursuing these avenues of connection that she becomes able to like open herself up to love and to life in all of its various forms as it's happening around her every day. That's the thing, is that her eyes are not really open to the way that life is happening around her, or to the ways that she is connected to it, all of these other lives that are surrounding her constantly. And so I love those moments. They don't exist for whimsy's sake alone. They are echoing the theme. It's a larger expansion of the theme. It's what makes the footprint of this movie feel bigger than it is.
And kind of an offshoot of that thematically that really resonated with me is kind of noticing characters searching for meaning in life. Like, and this can lead to the painter neighbor, because I really like him, but also, Nino's book of like, going around and collecting the thrown away, snapshot things and like piecing them together to look at these photos of people that have also thrown them away. And then
just a total creep, this guy.
It's pretty weird, but it's kind of like weird in like that American Beauty way, where like the guy films everything and it's like, that's definitely creepy, but like I can understand like the meaning that you're finding in it, and that Nito's obsessed with this one guy, right? That like always has this like, I want to know who this person is and I want to understand why he is this. They never say any of that also like in the text, but you can just get that sense of like I'm with him. Like I want to know what the deal is too. And then you kind of get the answer, and it's a little, you could read it as disappointing. He's just the repair guy, and it just kind of happenstance that like by him living his life, this thing is generated that then this person is found. But that's kind of also what's like beautiful and cool about it, is that it's just, this is life happening, and like the meaning is life.
Right. Well, and that he got the answer to his question. You know what I mean? Like he was he was so excited to just know what's going on.
Yeah, he's not disappointed at all. He's really excited, actually.
Yeah. And I love that that's the grand gesture, right? Or like sort of the grand romantic gesture of the movie, is that Amelie sets up for him the answer to his riddle that, like, again, without them ever having really spoken to each other, she's like, I'm going to help you solve a mystery that has been, sort of torturing you this whole time. And what a great, again, the romantic gesture is not something about the two. It's not confined to this like world of the two of them as though they're the only people in the world that exist. It's about helping Nino also connect to the larger world around him, which is I'm about to get really excited, which is what romance is like really about and should be about, right? Like, I feel like our models of romance in Hollywood are all so closed in and so narrow about like, I'm this person, I have this problem, and you're this other person, and then we're everything to each other, and like you complete me, and then this is the circle of two that is closed now. And that is not a healthy version of romance, and more movies should be bigger than that, right? Like real romantic models are about, or should be about, finding your partner is about someone who completes your life or opens you up to more life in a way that is imaginative and doesn't just like, okay, now your life is ended. Marry this person, live in one house forever. It's all done. Like, that's not a realistic or a healthy vision, I don't think, of romance. And Amelie does the opposite of that the romantic gesture is, again, opening Nino up and her up to like, we are connected to all of these people in our community, including this photo booth repair person that we've been wondering about.
Right.
So,
yeah, I mean, the bad version of the rom-com, especially with female protagonists, is like, I got the guy, so that's what I needed in my life. So now I'm happy, right? But Amelie, Little Women, Pride and Prejudice, Mulan, like these are all stories about people who like, they make their own change. Like the thing we care about the most is their happiness and their personal change and them overcoming that. And then, getting the guy is like the icing on the cake. It's like, well, now that's a nice reward, but like, you don't care about that as much as you care about their actual character change. And that should be any movie, obviously. But I think rom-coms are where it's most likely to get just like very thin and very just like, there's not much there,
Yeah. As though finding your romantic partner will somehow fix you. Right. Like, and that's certainly not the case in this movie.
At some point we should talk about Hitch. I think that'd be a really interesting conversation to be had about Hitch.
I bet you love that movie.
I do, and I did, but there are things to say. I don't know. It's a conversation piece.
All right, only if you and I can dress up as Will Smith and Kevin James.
Oh my God.
Oh,
wow.
Done.
Oh
now we have to.
Done.
As a filmmaker, when you're dealing with 4 to 8K footage, you're dealing with massive files. And massive files call for Massive. Massive is a file sharing solution for the modern post-professional tired of data caps and bubble-wrapped hard drives. Simply create an account to quickly transfer terabytes of data over the cloud. Massive's pay-as-you-go model means you only pay for what you need, and there are virtually no limits to the size of file you can share. Send uncompressed videos to teams around the world and speed up your production cycle. If you sign up today at massive.io/beyond-the-screenplay, you can get 100 gigabytes free towards your transfer. That's massive.io/beyond-the-screenplay for 100 gigabytes free. Thank you to Massive for sponsoring Beyond the Screenplay.
Going back to Amelie, let's talk about the ongoing subplot with, I think, is he called the Glass Man?
The Glass Man,
the Glass Man,
played by Samuel L. Jackson. That's a different movie. Sorry.
But I absolutely love, him as a character and as a plot device, to kind of help Amelie along on her journey of self-discovery. And I love the device of this painting, the boating party painting.
Yeah.
There's something so kind of magical about using the figure of the girl in the painting as the allegory for Amelie, and the way they can talk about her allows her to almost have like a therapy session by talking about this third person character who, isn't her, but is obviously her. And they both know it. And so, yeah, all those scenes with the two of them were just, it's such a clever way to let the characters talk as if they were in therapy about Amelie's, core character flaw, her core problems. And most movies, they don't, if they're going to have two characters talk about, hey, your problem is this, it can just feel like, we just get to an arbitrary moment in the movie where the truth has to come out. And so then they just talk about it. But in this movie, the truth can kind of come out in small doses slowly throughout, because there's this safety of one step removed. We're talking about the girl in the painting. So I just think it's really clever writing to invent that girl in the painting so they can have these ongoing dialogues about her.
And I feel like as their conversations go on, it, to me, reads as like they both know at some point
of course,
when they're talking about her, and I think that's also just a really interesting relationship too. Like their relationship, and that it's, it's something that seems to have been working on and kind of obsessed with also. Like, I can't solve like this painting, I can't figure this thing out. And it's also kind of like you're saying, Trisha, the connection to the world where like he can't until Amelie figures herself out, because it's all kind of connected. Like, I like that aspect of it too. And just the, kind of the obsessed artist thing also of like, I'm here, I can't go outside. And so I'm just trying to perfect this thing, but I need your help. And I like all of that a lot.
Well, they have this really beautiful dynamic because in many ways he's sort of like an archetypal mentor, right? And he, it's the video message from him that she gets right at the end of the movie that prompts her to go and, get Nino. Like, she can't answer the door when he first comes to the door because she's too afraid. And then she watches the video from her neighbor and he's like, go and get him. And, that leads to the sort of resolution of the thing where she finally overcomes that last like hurdle that she has to get over, which is just open the door.
Yeah.
Right.
He's the Knives Chow of this movie.
Yes. But her relationship with Dufayel is not just one way where he's like, I have everything in life figured out and I'm going to teach it to you. Right? He's actually more shut in than she is and more locked away from the world because of his condition. And, he just has his video camera pointed at the clock. So he like always knows what time it is up until, Amelie starts sending him videotapes of here's all of the things that are happening in the whole world, right? Here's a horse running in the Tour de France, and here's babies swimming in the water.
I'm pretty sure those videos inspired The Ring, because like each one of those, I was like, this is like a kind of happier version of The Ring video.
Wow.
Like
Horse
in 7 days,
babies.
he's going to live. Something creepy about them.
I think her videos are beautiful. Anyway, but again, they have this reciprocal thing where they're sort of learning from each other, where she's helping him to re-engage with something that he had kind of shut down in his life. And he's also sharing some of the wisdom that he has from having lived, a lot longer than she has and everything. And so I just think it's really lovely. And I agree with you, Alex, about those scenes with the painting and being able to talk about that. It's a relatively simple device, but in this case, really effective because it creates a character consistency for Amelie where we know that she can't talk about herself, right? She never talks about herself. But she can, talk very passionately about other people and engage with other people's lives really enthusiastically. And so I think that just having one step removed, it's simple, but it totally works. And it makes us believe that she can have this conversation in a way that she wouldn't be able to have another more direct conversation.
Another thought I was having when watching this, I was getting a lot of like Coraline vibes in terms of like, one character that's connected to all these characters. It's about Coraline, but it's also about everybody in the house.
Her neighbors, yeah.
And it felt, there was a lot of that kind of vibe to it, which I thought was cool and I appreciated.
Even kind of like the treasure hunty vibe of the movie is kind of is like Coraline. Yeah, I wrote another note. Like, I really would love Amelie to set up a delightful treasure hunt for me, because it just seems like so much fun what she does for people. It's one thing that's also very likable about her character is the creativity and the lengths she goes to give other people an experience. She's almost like, you know, a filmmaker in that way, where she delights in seeing the amazement on the man's face when he discovers his childhood, you know, box.
And she doesn't need anything from it. Like that is its own reward. She doesn't need to be like, "Hi, that was me," or anything like that.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, and that makes us just love her more.
Right. She genuinely is in it to see the other person have the experience, which is very likable.
The most poignant one, of course, is the letter that she creates from, you know, her landlady or whoever the apartment manager, you know, who's still obsessed with her husband who died, even though he was a cheating jerk.
Right.
And but she, you know, goes to the trouble to create a lost love letter. I believe it crosses the line potentially, but, you know, because she's
most morally like ambiguous kind of.
It's also
definitely.
It's also in the part of the movie where things start to fall apart, and that's one of the moments where her landlord is like, "Look at this letter I found." Amelie is like, "Leave me alone. Like, everything's falling apart. I'm over it." So it's almost like part of her moment where things start to stop working out, and consequences are happening now from all of her meddling.
Right.
And that's kind of what I was talking about in the beginning with this sort of like subtle darkness that's happening here. You know, I was thinking about the like thesis, antithesis, synthesis, you know, triptych in storytelling, and I was like, the very end of the first act, I think, is her giving the guy the box, and he finds it in the phone booth, and she's happy, and then it's almost like some of the next things we see her do are like, now she's getting addicted. So now she's setting up two people who, as far as we know, have no interest in each other, and she's doing things. You know, she's putting her grocer on the brink of death, and she's like mangling this letter, you know, with the weird zoom in that's hilarious. And I think that it's like, again, it's just doing this thing where we are seeing that it's just on that brink of, we can still love this character and have a nice time and everything, but we're also kind of always going, but are we okay with this point? Or has this crossed the line? And then, of course, Act 3, now we like, things come together, and she sort of figures out what her own issue is that she hasn't been dealing with up until this point.
Well, it's a really great example of the thesis, antithesis, you know, synthesis model that you just mentioned, Bri, because she does go way too far in the other direction, and it basically does kind of backfire on her in some ways. And, you know, that's sort of the whole thing, is that she's totally disengaged and not doing any life, either for herself or for anybody else. And then when she starts to meddle in people's lives, even though she's doing it for good reasons, she's doing it in the shadows. And so she is totally engaged, and like, she's got all these schemes. I think that's the word that she uses with her neighbor Dufayel. She's like, oh, she's devising a stratagem, right?
Stratagem, yeah.
She's doing all of these stratagems, but she's not risking anything personally, really, until she starts pursuing Nino. That's when she's risking like her own heart and her own you know, the tricks that she plays on the grocer, he very much deserves. B, are genius, and I love them. C, though, he's never going to catch her, right? That's never like a moment that we have in the movie where we're like, oh no, he's going to realize it's her. Like, we know he's never going to realize it's her. And same thing with, you know, her coworkers. It's not like she's ever going to get caught. So she's operating behind this curtain of anonymity, and then having to actually show up to places and to potentially meet Nino face to face and really put herself out there. That's, you know, the lesson that she has to learn by the end of the third act. And so I think that's what makes the second act fun to watch, but also we can see that she has gone too far in the wrong way.
Well, and there's that kind of almost crisis scene where he does show up at the restaurant where they are supposed to meet, and she just can't bring herself to talk to him. And it's painful, because you feel like you've gone through all this, and now that you've gotten him, you can't do it. You still haven't crossed that final hurdle of kind of introversion. So the movie is really great at making you want that moment to happen so badly. and even going as far as using a visual effect to capture.
She melts into a puddle.
Exactly. Just like the loss of that moment. Like you screwed it up and it's past now.
Interestingly, one thing I think about sometimes is movies where the protagonist and antagonist never meet, like The Fifth Element and some of the Harry Potters and Lord of the Rings, and like there's actually a surprising number of movies where they actually never meet, and there's not many rom-coms where the couple never meets until basically the last moment. Maybe there's like the You've Got Mails of the world where they're not aware of each other.
I was about to bring up You've Got Mail.
Yeah. But I just think it's super interesting that it's like they basically are. I mean, they are in the same space, obviously, and they do exchange a couple lines, but it's like always in this very, very distant kind of way. It's just interesting.
Well, I think You've Got Mail as an example. Sleepless in Seattle is like even more of an example, actually, in terms of the Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan of it all, because they actually never meet face to face in that movie until the very end, which is wild. That movie does not hold up, by the way. Some of it is still very charming, but I watched it recently and I was like, you two do not know anything about each other. Why? But the thing that I really love about Amelie, though, even though they never meet face to face, is that by nature of the interactions that they're having, they actually do start to get to know a lot about each other.
Sure.
Where like you're talking about the whimsical treasure hunt aspect, Alex, and anybody who's like collecting, torn up people's portraits from the photo booth would probably be down for a whimsical treasure hunt to get it back. And then I love his one-up move where he takes the picture of her with the question mark on her stomach and like photocopies it and starts putting it everywhere, where he's just like, you gave this to me in private, but I'm going to put it out here so I can find you.
Totally normal dude.
There's so much about it. No.
They're both weird.
I know.
Okay, fine.
Right for each other.
Yeah, exactly. Come on now. But yeah, they have actually a lot in common that you can, that not just that we know as the audience, but that they can tell about each other as they're, interacting even like remotely or, through paper.
Well, I think what becomes clear as the movie goes on is they both have some similar origin, where they both are these quiet people who have big imaginations and kind of are interested in others as kind of like the quiet observer. They both seem like they're the kind of quiet, I'm going to stand back and look out at the world kind of person. So in that way, they are these like strangely both very unique people, but both very similar for each other. And I have to say, like, one of my favorite parts of this whole movie is when they finally do meet. I think it's one of the best,
so
like,
beautiful
first kiss moments I've ever seen.
It is.
I love how, like, I don't know, like, delicate that moment is, but like also because it's so delicate and gentle, it's very like highly like sensual. And because it's not, oh my God, we finally got each other, let's make out now. There's something very, I don't know, it just feels somehow perfect for the movie and the characters and everything. So yeah, whoever thought of that in the team, well done.
Well, it does something that this movie does impeccably throughout, which is that sex and sexuality are very much a part of the text of this movie, but they are not overly romanticized.
Mm-hmm.
They're just sort of a part of life in the way that everything else is kind of a part of life.
Yeah.
And so I love, and that's why that moment feels different and feels special, because Nino works at this sex shop and like is surrounded by like sex and nudity and, all of this stuff every day. And there are many different instances where like sex is discussed or shown in the movie as just in sort of this matter of fact way. Like, this is what people do. This is who we are. This is a part of life. Sometimes it's meaningful. Sometimes it's just really not, in the case of that scene we have with Amelie earlier with some faceless boyfriend. And even in, the first opening montage, it's like with Amelie's conception, it's like, here's a sperm that made a dash for the egg. And then here Amelie was born 9 months later. And, all of that, the sex part is just in here in a way that I think is really hard to I don't know. I was going to say really hard to do an American film potentially.
Oh,
And,
I was saying,
right.
it
I
feels
think there's
very
a cultural
French.
thing here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you couldn't have a film with this tone and this kind of like lighthearted love of life whimsy and have explicit sexual content in it in an American film, I think, because it would suddenly put it in this new category of
Right.
like a hard R like sex movie. And it just feels like the French
It's a
don't
very
have
horny pirate, Alex.
hard R. Yeah. No, but I feel like when you have explicit sexual content in an American film, it puts it
Yes.
in this like other zone
Yep.
that it would now feel like incongruous to have it also be a life-affirming, whimsical, sweet little love story. And
Exactly.
I think it's a testament to just how French this movie ultimately is. That there's not that hang up. There's not that concern about, oh my God, we've like shown some explicit sexual content. So now this is like a super adult, like ban it from the kids movie. There's a frankness, like you said, about sexuality. It's just a fact of life. Nothing special about it. No big deal. It's just there.
Mm-hmm.
With like enough finesse though to like still have it be, like it can be sexy when it needs to be.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
because now, there are Wes Anderson films where like randomly, like, that person is like naked for no reason in the corner of the frame. And so it's doing a little bit of that, like, nudity, sexuality is just part of life, but also it's like so cold and detached that it feels like pushing too hard the other way. And I feel like that's where this movie feels like a nice like finesse in this place that, like you're saying, might only be able to come from a different culture.
Right.
Well, it's not making a point about it, right?
Right.
It's not trying to make a point of like, these people are so
one way or the other.
Right, exactly. These people are so detached that sex means nothing, right? Like that's not the point of it at all. And at the same time, it's not like the heavy burden of like, well, these people had sex, so now that there's all these like love entanglements and feelings and emotions, and also all of the Puritan like hang up that we have here in the US about sex. But yeah, it's just this very light touch on all of it where it's Nino just works at the sex shop and his coworker's just dancing, and there's nudity and that's her job and he's works there with her and whatever. Like I love those scenes. I love all of the other like sort of treatment of it throughout. It just strikes the right tone and it makes that moment when Nino comes to the door and they actually do meet face to face and they have that first kiss that you talked about or several in a row right there. It makes that feel different and special and elevated in a way where it's like, we understand the vulnerability that it took for Amelie to get here. And it's not that she's never kissed anybody before, right? I feel like that would be the really bad, obvious way to do it. Right. She's never had a boyfriend and whatever.
Yeah.
It's not that at all. It's that this person actually knows her in a way. And she really does have feelings on the line here. And it took everything for her to run to the door to go and get him. And so I think that's it. Having sex be present in places earlier in the movie gets you that tension in the climax where it actually feels like something romantic is happening for the first time surrounding sex, even though that aspect of life has already been present.
Cool. Why don't we go around and say what lessons we're going to take away from Amelie? Brian, do you want to start?
Sure. I learned that when you name your daughter after Audrey Hepburn, she just grows up to look exactly like her, which is fascinating. But I was thinking, like, going off of the sex thing, it's sort of obvious, but just showing what people like and dislike tells you a lot about a character, period, right? Like on the Indiana Jones episode, I talked about sort of crafting this character who just being like, all you have to say to someone is like, hates snakes, whip. And they're like, done. I already know who you're talking about. And this movie does that with every character, basically. So when 20 minutes from now, you're like, oh, it's Bubble Wrap Guy. I know that guy. He likes Bubble Wrap. And, it doesn't necessarily tell you who the character is, right? But it does help you familiarize yourself with them. It helps you remember them. And it certainly tells you something about them. So, Trisha, what you were saying about sex being present, it's like the 2 times we hear Amelie mention sex is the hilarious bored sex that we see her have, and like she tried it and it was fine, whatever.
Yeah.
But then this sort of like, she's wondering how many people are having orgasms or at, like right in that moment. It's 15. And so it's like, it's still like a curiosity to her and something that she is sort of interested in. But just having someone who is bored by sex but loves creme brulee and sticking her hand in a thing, right? Like that does tell you so much about who the character is.
Yeah.
And obviously you can't have a narrator always saying, this is what this character likes in your movie. But obviously you can write that into your script. You can, have them say what they like or show them doing things that they like. And it just helps them feel unique and three-dimensional and that kind of thing. And as a personal exercise, it's something I like to do is when I'm writing something with multiple characters, I start thinking, what music does this character listen to? What movies does this character like? Because then even if all that does for me is start to find ways to separate those characters and find ways to generate conflict where it's like, I may never say that this character thinks, this movie is better than this movie, but now that I know that, now that's going to help me see who they are as I'm writing a scene or whatever. So, so yeah, pretty simple one. This movie just does really well. It's just tell us what your character's like and don't.
Some lesson from either a book or a show or a made up imaginary past of mine or whatever, but that was basically like, if you ask someone to tell you what they're like, you're going to get a complex, weird, we're not good at evaluating who we are in a lot of ways. But if you go into somebody's bedroom and spend like 2 seconds there, you get a really good impression of like who they are because of what they put on the walls or what they don't put on the walls. And like, maybe they have a huge Blu-ray collection. Maybe they have a poster with like positive messages on it in the background, whatever it might be.
It's a visual joke for our video patrons.
Anyway, just that's, I think, like you're saying, that's a really good lesson. And that there are these external things that we use to express ourselves and maybe even subconscious ways that can get to our deeper cores in a really efficient way. And you should study that if you're a storyteller. So awesome. Alex, what's your lesson?
So my lesson is about visual effects, because this movie very much like Black Swan, which you talked about recently with Maggie Mae Fish. We talked about in Black Swan, there's like, how many visual effects shots, Michael? Like 300 something.
Yeah, something.
But they're very subtle. They're woven into this otherwise very gritty movie. They sometimes are very obvious, but other times not obvious at all and very subtle and kind of just psychological. And I think it just is a good reminder that visual effects don't have to be only associated with action movies or these big, flashy uses. Like this movie uses a ton of visual effects for just getting us into a mind space or putting together a puzzle that Amelie just like kind of solved in her mind. There's so many different ways that like Amelie's world and her emotions and her just state of mind are created through visual effects in this movie. And I'm happy that like that palette was available for this kind of movie. Because usually you think, well, this smaller kind of character study movie, visual effects just don't belong here. But I would love to see more visual effects used this way. I think not every movie should be Amelie, where everything is kind of a fantasy interpretation of the world. But I do think there's probably more opportunities than we realize to incorporate visual effects into films that aren't obviously visual effects films. And this is a great film to look at, of just like, wow, look how much creativity, how much artistry went into the visual effects of this film that is on its surface a very small character story. And look how much just beauty and creativity came out of embracing visual effects in a story like this.
It's such a clever way to externalize the characters' like internal journeys, because in this case you have two really introverted central characters and that don't really have anyone else to talk to, because one of the ways that we often track a character's journey is through dialogue. But when you have characters that are introverted, it feels disingenuous to just like make them say what they feel. And so having visual effects, and there are a number of ways the movie does this, but like the scene where, her lamp is like turns to look at her
Right.
or whatever. And those pictures that Nino has that start talking to each other and talking
Right.
to him.
Yeah.
And all of those little moments, that's a critical scene, right? Where Nino is talking to those photographs about Amelie and his hopes and like, what does she want? You know about her, like, tell me about her. And we know it's all in his imagination, right? But it's a critical scene where we get an insight into where Nino is at and what he like might be open to and all of this stuff. And so I think, yeah, all of those, it's film, it's supposed to be visual. So
Right.
finding ways to use all of the tools in the toolbox to make a character's journey visual and entertaining, and in this case, whimsical as hell.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. No, it's always so fun when movies, like you're saying, Trisha, it's like there's so many tools in the toolbox. A lot of time they're used to try to create a copy of reality or a believable world. And it's really fun when movies just go the opposite way.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're going to use all the tools to put you into the minds of the characters and tell a story. That's always fun. Trisha, what's your lesson?
Yeah. So on the top 10 podcast that I brought this up on, the one scene that I got to mention was the scene where she helps the blind man down the street. And I was watching it again really carefully this time because that scene makes me cry every time. And there are a number of reasons, and maybe I can just extrapolate lessons as I discuss them. But one of them is that's a character we know is a part of the world and the community that Amelie has not ignored before, but we've seen him be ignored before.
Sure.
That, we see him earlier in the subway. He's like playing music and no one's listening to it, right? And Amelie comes and gives him a coin, right? But then kind of just like moves on. And we see him in the neighborhood too, and no one's really paying attention to him or helping him or anything like that. So that's part of it. It's a character that doesn't come totally out of nowhere, although his arc is relatively small, or his sort of place in this movie is relatively small. But it speaks volumes about Amelie. It's like one of those amazing character choices that exists not for a plot reason, but just for a character reason, for the central character. And often we see this choice, this kind of choice, it usually comes right at the top when the character is introduced, right? And we have a few of those moments where like the first test of like, who is this character? And usually, it's in the first 5 pages and it never has anything to do with anything else. It just kind of tells us who the character is.
Save the
sort
cat.
of like a cold open choice, if you will. Yeah. But I think that we have a few of those, when we first meet Amelie and all kinds of things. We hear about her likes and dislikes and her childhood and stuff like that. But this moment where it's the first person she helps after she gives the guy back his box, right? She's just inspired. It's not a stratagem. It's not premeditated. She just sees this man that she kind of knows on the street, grabs his arm, and starts telling him about things that he can't experience with any of his senses. So that's the thing too. She's not patronizing him. Like, she's not telling him just like stuff that she hears or feels, right? Because he can experience those things. She's telling him specifically things that he can't know because he can't see. So she's saying like, oh, here's the deal on groceries at the grocers, right? Here's the deal on plums or whatever it is. And here's this woman that I've observed these things about her that you would only know if you were her neighbor and had seen her multiple times. She's sharing insight that she has gained by living as a seeing person. So she's throwing open a window to a person who has been isolated and on the fringes of society, where in a way she recognizes herself in this other person and is making a change. It's the real departure moment for her where, she vows to become a do-gooder, as the script says. And I think if the movie immediately launched us into, well, now she's got a big plan about her dad's garden gnome and about, whatever else her big plans are about, or her coworkers, is she just sees this opportunity. And in this new lease on life that she has, she dives right into it. And that tells us so much about Amelie, and it gives this movie so much momentum in the second act. As a departure from the first act, as a break into two, if you want to call it that, which I think is a fair characterization of that moment, it's a great break into two. That if this is possible, where she, you know, gives this transcendent moment to a disabled neighbor, if this is possible, then what is she going to do next? And it keeps us wondering. So even though one little storyline is resolved in the first act, there's so much more that we start to wonder about what's coming next down the pipeline. It's brilliant. It's lovely. It's just so well executed. Yes.
Well, and speaking of visual effects, that ends with this beautiful like visualization of the inner state of the man. Yes. You know, like he has this moment, like this peak experience.
He levels up.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Well, yeah, and as we said, you know, eventually it's that same journey that she's on will go dark, and there will be a bad side of it. But like you're saying, it's a great way to get us on board with this thing that will ultimately be revealed to have problems. My lesson is also just kind of a simple one. And this metaphor, I think, came from connecting it to Coraline, but just as we talked about earlier, the interconnected web of all the characters and the world. And I love movies that take the time to fill it all out and have everybody, you know, one thing happens and those vibrations touch everybody's or travel through the web, and it makes the experience of the film feel so rich. Like by the end, you feel like you've spent a ton of time in this world and lived there, and it feels so like full. And a lot of times I think movies can feel empty if they're too focused or don't pay enough attention to how our characters change the world and how the world changes them and that interaction. And I think this is an excellent example of creating that interconnected web and having it be thematically resonant, as you were talking about, Trisha, and also just what it does for the viewer's experience, I think is undeniable. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. What have you guys been watching? Eeny, meeny, miny. Alex, what have you been watching?
So if you are a cinephile in Los Angeles, you probably know about American Cinematheque, which hosts kind of like, you know, screenings of older films. They used to do the stuff at the Egyptian Theater, which is, I think, closed for renovations right now. So we haven't had like an East Side American Cinematheque Theater in LA for a while. But they just took over the Los Feliz 3 like a month ago. And so I went for the first time the other night to see Bad Education, the Pedro Almodovar film, which I'd never seen. It was one that I've been wanting to see for years. And it was a great experience. I sat like in the front row because it's like kind of a small theater. So like the front row is like still works. Just center front row seeing this great movie. And yeah, Bad Education. Wow, what a subversive, dark, interesting film. It was not anything like I expected. I didn't know much about it except for, you know, it involved a story about some stuff with like, you know, Catholic sexual abuse, and it was a kind of a queer story. But it's also a really cool movie formally because it's like a movie within a movie within a movie. Like there's a script in the movie, and there's like a reality in the movie, and story, like a story within the script. So just from like a kind of script construction perspective, really clever devices. And the opening titles kind of had a Hitchcockian throwback feel to them. So it's this really remarkable film. It's both like, it's like rated NC-17. It's a very like explicit movie. It's very gay. Gael Garcia Bernal is like amazing in it, but it's also this like kind of cool, twisty, what's reality, what's fiction, stories within stories kind of movie. So Bad Education, if you're down for a subversive, dark, interesting film, highly recommended.
That was another one of the movies that I rented during my foreign DVD rental at Hollywood.
Very nice.
Years. That ties in a funny way to my What Am I Watching, which is, it's not often that a movie that you recently watched is in the movie we're podcasting about. But I recently watched Jules and Jim, the Truffaut movie, which is
it's so good.
Briefly in Amélie. And yeah, like it's super interesting. It's about two men who meet this the same woman and both fall in love with her, and she kind of falls in love with both of them. And funnily enough, I was like, oh, this is a precursor to Y Tu Mamá También and Bandits and some of these other movies where there's conflict, but it's not the obvious conflict. It's not, oh, they're fighting over it. It's more like, how do we make this situation work because we all care about each other, which is like so much more interesting than just people trying to one-up each other. But funnily enough, American Cinematheque recently did a double feature of Y Tu Mamá También with Gael Garcia Bernal and Jules and Jim. So I was like, all right,
nice.
I didn't make that up. But yeah, it's part of this like French New Wave thing, which I've just started experiencing because I didn't go to film school and wasn't forced to watch all these movies, when I was 20. But Scorsese actually said it was a huge influence on Goodfellas because it's like this punk rock filmmaking is the way that he described it, where it's just like the camera's here and it's spinning around and like there's crazy shots, but it's all making you feel stuff, right? It's making you feel like you are part of this adventure that these characters go on, kind of like, what Amelie would do 40 years later. So yeah, I don't want to say too much about what the actual plot is other than just that. It's about three people and the relationships that they have with each other. And Trisha is a fan.
I love it. If you haven't watched Jules and Jim, like go right now. Like just go right now and watch it. Let's talk French New Wave sometime, Brian.
There you go. I have just watched a lot. Yes.
Yay. Okay, good.
Does it count if I watched the Wes Anderson commercial with Léa Seydoux for Prada that's based on that? No? No. Right.
Sorry.
Okay.
Good try,
Want
though.
to check. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, great. Awesome. Trisha, what have you been watching?
So I have a French TV show that I would like to recommend, which is a bit late because everyone told me I should watch it, and I finally did. And the third season of it came out earlier this year. But I watched Lupin, and it's great.
I talked about that for my What Am I Watching on Black Swan with Maggie May Fish. And one of the things I mentioned in that is that I wanted to talk to you about it because I was watching it and I was like, this is a Trisha thing. Trisha's got to watch it. So I'm very excited that you've been watching. I want to hear it continue.
Okay, yeah. So I finally sat down and watched the whole thing of it because everyone had been telling me that I absolutely needed to watch it. And they were right because it's so heisty and twisty and genuinely full of I don't know. It just feels really well grounded while also being slick. I would describe it as being kind of like a slick, heisty, thief kind of crime series. And yet at the same time, parts of it feel really sharply observed. And, so Amelie was criticized a little bit when it came out for being this depiction of Paris that is not realistic for a variety of reasons, as we discussed. Mm-hmm. It's very clean is thing number one, but it was also criticized for being not a very diverse film and, pointing out that there are lots of political and racial tensions in the city and were at the time. And the movie is not about any of them. It's like, look at this community of white people that are just going to their local grocers and sticking their hand into sacks of grain. I don't know. Right. So if you want something French from recent years that dives head on into political and racial tension in the city, Lupin is that, while still being a really, really fun ride and being, this incredible, sort of crime capery, really entertaining, twisty thing. So I really enjoyed it. I guess there's going to be more ? I think I read that.
I haven't finished. There's one episode left. That I haven't seen, so I'm very excited.
I'm pretty sold based on hearing both you and Michael talk about this show.
Yeah, it's really
Michael
fun.
recommended it. I wasn't, but now that Trisha is.
Yeah, now I'm sold.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, me too. Trisha's recommendations are always more compelling than mine.
Well, I'm glad that you were watching it. I can't wait to talk to you about it more off mic, Michael. Or maybe we can talk about it over in the Discord because I bet we have some Lupin fans over there, and I don't think it has come up yet. So yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Only about the little dog whose name is Jacques, but yes. Anyway, Lupin, really excellent. If you are down to watch French things, then you can choose from mine or Brian's recommendations so far.
Lots of
everything French I've watched recently is at least 20 years old, if not 50. So, maybe if you're looking for something more recent, go for
there you go. Modern French television.
Yeah. Awesome. I watched Cruella.
Yeah.
Oh.
And I really liked it.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun with Cruella. So, yeah, if somehow you don't know, it's like, the origin story of Cruella de Vil from 101 Dalmatians. Emma Stone as Estella / Cruella. They do some interesting things with kind of this Dr. Jekyll Hyde thing going on. and Emma Thompson as like, the antagonist, the Baroness. Emma Thompson is wonderful to watch do things.
Always.
Emma Stone is wonderful to watch do things. I am not like a costumes clothing person. And even I was like, wow, the clothing is happening in this movie. Like,
very much.
There is much clothing happening here. And, from the trailers, I was a little bit like, what? Why? I mean, okay, sure. But the style, I thought it was really fun. I feel like, it's a little bit of a heist movie also. So it has some of that crime heistiness to it. It's like
also a period movie.
Also a period movie, well structured. I think a really interesting approach to it. And I was watching it and I was like, I'm getting some Devil Wears Prada vibes here. And I'm getting a little bit of The Favorite vibes here. And Aline Brush McKenna, story by credit. Yep. And Tony McNamara, screenplay credit, who wrote The Favorite and The Devil Wears Prada. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that much, but really enjoyed myself. And again, Emma Stone feels like unfair. I've said it before that like Emma Stone is like might be the Meryl Streep of our generation. I'm going to keep standing behind that, I think, to the point where like the way that Meryl Streep is sometimes annoying because she's so good and the movie knows that she's so good. It's like, okay, fine, calm down, everybody. There's like a couple moments in this and like one long take in particular where it's just like Emma Stone is just like, it's a long take. She's giving this great performance. It's like, okay, yeah, I know, movie, okay? Like, you can do this because it's Emma Stone playing young Cruella de Vil. Like, congratulations. Anyway, but I really enjoyed it. It's now available on Disney+.
Wow.
My mom, bless her heart, watched it and still didn't know that it was a 101 Dalmatians prequel.
Aww.
Yeah.
Well, there aren't actually any real Dalmatians in it.
Sure.
So that's understandable.
But like,
there are a lot of CG dogs.
Like we have dogs. Like we have access to dogs that you can train. And they'll do things.
Yeah. I feel like it was really interesting tracking the CGI dogs. Some of them are very good. Some of them are adorable. Sometimes you get little performance moments where I was like, is that a real dog? No, it's CG, but like I understand and good work, everybody. So
wow.
I don't know. I liked it. And also, as I was watching it, I was like, I haven't seen 101 Dalmatians in forever, but suddenly like glimpses of it are appearing in my brain and synapses are firing that hadn't. So it was also just really fun to like relive my childhood slowly through memories flashing back while watching Cruella. So thumbs up from Michael on Cruella.
Wow. Love it.
Yeah. This has been our conversation about Amelie. I want to say a big thank you, as always, to the patrons on Patreon for making this show possible. Thank you to our producer, Vince Major, and our editor, Eric Schneider. I'm Michael Tucker, and I've been joined today by Trisha Arand, Brian Bittner, and Alex Calleros. As always, our Twitter handles are in the show notes. Send us a tweet, say hi if you're enjoying the podcast, or not. That's fine. Leave us a review on iTunes. It always helps. And
don't leave us a bad review.
Yeah, wait, Michael, what are you saying?
No pressure either way. Whatever you want to do with your life is
leave
fine.
us a great review.
Leave us a 5-star review.
Hang on. If you've listened to the end of the episode and didn't like it,
that's a really good point.
I am actually really curious. So write us whatever review you want.
Yeah. If you're still listening currently, send us an email even of like what you anyway. Thank you everybody for listening, and we will see you in the next episode.
Bye everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.